The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Giants baseball, past, present, future. I'm Ralph Tyko. Michael Duca is the host, and we should really be up because the Giants have been playing unbelievably good baseball, and all is going well, but life gets in the way. And Michael, would you tell us about your loss? And we'll quickly get on to baseball, but we must pay homage to your dearly departed kitten.
Well, I lost my 11-year best friend way too soon. She was my constant companion. When she was a kitten, she figured out that my laser printer was the warmest spot in the office, and so she would sleep in the exit chute, and whenever I printed, the paper would cover her. She had 3 World Series rings to her credit, and 11 years isn't nearly long enough, but you know how cats are, Ralph. I know you're a cat lover yourself. They are genetically encoded to hide it when they're sick, and she did a great job. As I told you off the air, last Tuesday she was perfectly fine. Last Wednesday she went through all her nighttime, bedtime rituals, and Thursday her breathing was labored. We took her into the vet, and they said she had lung cancer on both sides and needed to be put down immediately, or she would essentially suffocate herself. So we did what we had to do. It wasn't what we wanted to do.
I know. You do it, you get through it, but you have your memories, and as I told you off air, there are no words, and I'm sorry. That's nothing I can say will make it better, and but that's how I feel, and I hope talking about it is for the best.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts. Thank you. And now I have a question for you.
Okay. We
open every show with the phrase, "We're back." Where do we go in between?
Oh, boy. That's a show in itself, if we had to tell you where we went. Because we're going sometimes for a week, sometimes even this has been 2 weeks, so much show fodder to talk about.
Yeah, we do. I mean, we have the Giants' first winning month in 2 years. We have their best June since 1964. We have a starting rotation that leads the National League in ERA since the 1st of June. As you said, many good things to talk about, and all of those are done without their putative number 2 and number 3 starters, both of whom come back to the rotation this week.
And without Longoria as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost shocking. We were 2 weeks ago talking about nothing more can be done. We must accept that this is one of those incredibly hopeful years that injuries killed. But who knew they were this deep coming up?
Well, I mentioned this to someone else over the past week, Ralph. I think that it's time that people understand that, first of all, because Baseball America says you don't have a very good farm system, doesn't mean you don't have a very good farm system. I would point out, as a journalist, that people who are really good at evaluating talent aren't writing about it, they're doing it.
Whoa.
And
it's very interesting, because a man named Pablo Sandoval was not listed when he was coming up. He was not listed in Baseball America's yearly prospect book that they put out with supposedly the 50 best prospects in each organization. Pablo does not make that book, does not make the top 50 coming up.
And for that, I'm going to quote fellow UCSD alumnus Billy Bean. We're not selling genes.
Well, I'm sorry.
By which I mean,
say that again?
We're not selling genes. It has to do with the number one draft pick who never made it to the major leagues for the A's, but the number one draft pick that was discussed in Moneyball, where everybody was looking at the numbers, and this kid was great, but the scouts went out and looked at him and said, he doesn't pass the eye test. And Billy said, we're not selling genes. Yeah, he's a squatty, fat kid, but he's an athlete. Pablo never passed the eye test. Pablo never looked like a ball player, not in the minor leagues. I saw him in the minor leagues. Came up as a catcher, and he looked like a catcher, but he looked like an old catcher. You know, he looked like somebody who's been catching for 20 years.
To this day, I believe he's a little older than is listed on the records. Just a hunch. Given he looked like a man. And you're talking, where you saw him was in San Jose.
Yeah.
And he did look like a man playing with boys at that time.
Yeah. So the thing that you have to remember, and this is, there's two things that I always counsel people about when they talk about the future. One of them is there are no prospects. They're all suspects until they're proven. So don't get excited about trading existing talent to stock up with prospects, because other organizations don't evaluate any better than yours does for the most part, and people lie. I mean, the two best examples of that are the Dodgers and the Yankees in the 60s and 70s. I mean, how many rookies of the year did the Dodgers have in the 70s? I think they had 4, maybe even 5. And
Grabarkowitz and those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Who heard of Billy Grabarkowitz afterwards? You know, Bill Sudeikis was supposed to be the next coming of Pie Traynor. All organizations talk up their guys, especially at trade time. So you're always going to come away from a trade thinking, that you just fleeced the other guy and you managed to steal the crown jewels. And in fact, you're lucky sometimes if you got cubic zirconia. Now,
yeah, but the exception that may prove that rule is the Yankees with Chapman getting those prospects and then having the foresight or whatever, they signed them back as a free agent.
And sometimes, sometimes you have to. I mean, here's the deal, and this is an interesting philosophical and legal question, and I have to go back to my second point in a minute. But if a player is under contract to your organization, can you collude with him? Because that deal with Chapman, was prearranged. They said, we're going to trade you into a pennant race. We're going to get back enough people so that when you come back to us next year, you'll be in a pennant race here too. But we're going to give you some pennant race experience and then bring you back. And if they agree to that,
he's under contract to you, is it indeed collusion? Or is it just...
It's not collusion. It's not tampering.
Yeah.
Because
it's your guy.
And that's where things get interesting. I mean, you think about that for a minute. What are the implications of that? And why isn't it done more often?
Very good question.
So the first thing I have to say is that, don't fall in love with prospects, because the answer to what have you done for me lately is nothing. And the second thing is never forget that the goal is major league players. And what you do in the minor leagues isn't necessarily directly reflective of what you will do in the major leagues. I know that Bill James has his favorite toy, and that which is what he calls the model, and that he's found a way that he feels he can, somewhat accurately predict from minor league statistics major league performance. But the point is, first of all, whatever minor league you're in, it's mixed American and national leagues, and so you're not going to be facing the same people that you will be facing at the big league level. And, of course, you're not facing big leaguers. And, of course, you're not in parks with great lights all the time, and you're playing under different circumstances. I mean, everybody, and we'll bring this back to the Giants, everybody is kind of sitting there dumbfounded at how well Andrew Suarez and Chris Stratton and Derek Rodriguez have filled in the gaps for Madison Bumgarner and Johnny Cueto and Jeff Samardzija. Well, you can't look at Pacific Coast League Western Division stats for pitchers because the parks are at such, they're so crazy. I mean, you've got parks at altitude like Reno, at altitude like Colorado Springs, at altitude like Albuquerque. You've got hard-baked infields. You've got brutal summer times. And that's going to skew hitting numbers and pitching numbers. And so, you see Hunter Pence go down for rehab and hit 3 home runs in a week on the road in the minor leagues. And you go, oh, well, I guess he's got his stroke back. And then he comes up and hasn't hit a ball off the wall yet. So,
and then there are some players that can't hit in the minors, can't hit as well in the minors as they do in the majors. They come up, balls are around the plate, this, that, and the other thing. Very unpredictable.
Well, here's the other reality. See, when you're facing major league pitching, it's going to be very good, okay? It's going to be a challenge. But the one thing that sets major league pitching apart from minor league pitching is its consistency. So if you've got a guy who is trying to get you out in the very bottom outside corner of the strike zone, and he's doing that, you can adjust your swing down there. But if you've got a guy in the minor leagues who's trying to get you out, he's probably trying to get you out on the outer half. Up and down don't matter because he can't command that. He may have the control to hit the strike zone, but he doesn't have command in the strike zone. And that
you hit
more
on a
difficult
word.
to hit against.
The word is adjust. That is probably the key word in player development. And what I'd like to know, and I guess the question, it's a rhetorical question, but when will baseball players start adjusting to the outrageous shift and go 4 for 4 by hitting 2 singles, and 2 doubles down the third baseline when nobody is there, if you know what I'm saying? Breaking the shift.
About that. There's 2 or 3 things I can tell you about that. One of them is you don't get to the major leagues without being a little bit arrogant and without having some pride. And so I'll take you back to the first guy that they shifted against consistently, one Theodore Samuel Williams, whose thought process on the shift when asked, you probably have the best bat control of anybody since Ty Cobb. Why don't you just, take the third baseline when they're giving it to you? His answer was, I'll hit it through them. I'll just hit it harder.
Right.
And that's a hitter's mentality. You're not going to take a guy like a Brandon Belt who is used to being a power hitter and turn him into a singles hitter in order to improve his average or his on-base average, both of which are already pretty good. But nevertheless, we've seen him bunt. We've seen him bunt several times. We've even seen him try to bunt with 2 outs. So, it's there. It's a very interesting question because I was talking with Tim Meade, the great PR director of the Angels and literally one of the 10 finest human beings that walk this earth. I absolutely, I just have so much respect for Tim and his opinions. And we were talking about the shift, and he said, I don't see any way that they can possibly legislate against the shift and enforce it. And I said, it's a lot easier than people think. It's very simple. I said, you have to do 2 things. You have to standardize the size of the infield dirt, the base path. Right now, there's no standard for that. It can be as narrow or as wide as the team wants it to be.
Oh, I did not know that.
So you standardize that, or at least you make a minimum size for it, or a maximum size for it, probably is more important. So that's the first thing you do. And then the next thing you do is you pass a rule that says the defense must have 2 players standing on the dirt on either side of second base. Done.
Okay.
You already have a rule that says everybody but the catcher has to be in fair territory. You can't set up the first baseman when he hugs the line. He can't straddle the line. That's not legal.
Okay. And it's a simple enough rule that, boom, it's right there.
It's there, and it's one that I fully expect them to consider, if not implement. And the way they will do it is they'll try it in the fall league for a year or maybe even 2 to see how much effect it has on the game. I mean, at the same point in time, I'm not necessarily a fan of telling people, now that we've got all this data and now that we know that 56% of all of Brandon Belt's batted balls go in the 30-degree radius between the first baseline and 2/3 of the way to the second base bag. Okay? Yeah.
Right.
Stack up the defense there. I mean, that makes sense. That's not to do that makes as little sense as saying, well, let's see. Darryl LaMonica and Warren Wells are out there. I think we're going to do press coverage short and just let them leak into the defensive secondary if they want to. Not a good idea. You know what their tendencies are. You know they're going to throw deep. You better defend deep. It makes as little sense as saying, Aaron Judge is up. I think I'll play shallow in the outfield.
Right.
You don't do those things. You react defensively. They're reacting defensively. And you know what? It's literally the first time the defense has reacted in baseball, I don't know, ever.
Okay, 2 things, 2 questions. Shifting has brought it to the point where, and this accelerated lift that they're teaching on their strokes brought it to the point where 41 players who would qualify for the batting title had they won a batting title or were eligible, they're eligible and hitting under 200. 41 players in today's that amazes me.
Well, and I think the thing that's probably even more amazing if you look at it is the fact that we're more than halfway through the season. And I think by now we can project a line out and say it is more likely than not this year will be the first year in the history of the game where in the major leagues there will be more strikeouts than hits. And And you know who loves this? Who absolutely loves this?
The kids, probably.
Earl Weaver. Earl Weaver said, winning baseball is about pitching and 3-run homers. Well,
right.
It's not only still about pitching and 3-run homers, it's even more about pitching and 3-run homers now than it used to be. So, the goal of the game is to score runs. And here's the question that I have, and I don't know the answer to this, but, for 120 years, the average score of a game was 5-3. Is it still? If the net outcome of all of this is that we wind up in about the same place that we were before, and we just have more strikeouts and fewer double plays, well, we have more strikeouts and fewer double plays. Everybody knows chicks dig the long ball. So, home runs are the preferred way of scoring now. And you know who benefits from that kind of philosophy?
Mm-hmm.
Your San Francisco Giants benefit from that philosophy because they have a ballpark and a pitching staff that neutralizes that method of attack. They've given up fewer home runs than anybody else in the National League. They've given up fewer home runs at home than anybody in baseball.
Okay. One other thing I have been holding in for 2 weeks, wanted to ask you, and there was a big series on Major League MLB TV about hit or error, and they had maybe 12 ideas. They'd run it by the panel, and you'd see ball hit hard, eats the third baseman up, this, that, and the other thing. What is it scored, hit or error? And I wanted to ask you if, as an official scorer, if over the last 20 years, say, the definition as you see it, has it changed? Is a hit today the same as it was 20 years ago? And is an error today the same as it was 20 years ago? And you can get back to your what you learned from Leonard Cobbett about that. Would you elaborate on that?
I would be happy to. Here's what I know. I went back and I actually went through Baseball Reference, and decade by decade, I counted errors per game. And there has been a steady decrease in the number of errors per game, which has led to it alone can be you can attribute just to that decrease in errors about a 1/2 run difference in ERAs across the board. I think that as the players have gained more power through the union, and this is just an opinion, and it's mine only, not Major League Baseball's, but it's my suspicion that as players gained more power through the union, and as people, 20 years ago, guys who were scoring were also writing. And they had to go downstairs and ask about the error that they called on somebody. And the players aren't dumb. They know who the scorer is. And so that became a clear conflict of interest, a problem for the journalistic side. And so there was kind of a tacit agreement between the Baseball Writers Association and the newspapers and Major League Baseball that you had to be a retired writer now. And by definition, retired writers, retired anybody, all of us old farts, tend to remember the past with a little bit more fondness and a little bit shinier burnish than it probably deserves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, hence the phrase, they don't make them like they used to, whatever they are. I know I grew up hearing that.
And in some ways, thank God they don't make them like they used to. Because it was planned obsolescence.
Well, when I was 5 years old, my dad had to make a panic stop in our Ford Fairlane, and there were no seat belts, and I flew forward, and I chipped a tooth on the metal dashboard. I mean, all of those things they don't make like they used to, except maybe teeth.
Right.
So do I think a hit is the same thing as it was 20 years ago? For the most part, I do. What I do think is different, and I think it's a better kind of different, is that in the last 10 years, Major League Baseball has decided to invest in its official scorers. And it has held annual training meetings. About a third of us each year, give or take, are invited to the 2-day annual training meetings. We review all of the plays that were turned in on appeal and, not sight unseen. We watch the plays, but without knowing the outcomes, we vote as a group which way we would call it, and then we are instructed as to how it wound up going on, the initial call and how it wound up going on the appeal. All of this is with an ideal towards two things: establishing and then propagating best practices, and standardizing the idea behind scoring across cities. Because the single most common complaint that a scorer would get, I heard it myself many times, was, we always get screwed on the road. We expect you to take care of us at home. And my answer was always the same, and it was always immediate. I told them, the situation never gets better until somebody stops doing it. And it stops here. I won't do that.
Right, because
and I felt that way.
And you're making up for it, you're screwing some other team on the road.
Well, you're perpetuating it.
Right.
You are, not only are you continuing it, you're making it worse because you're making it okay. And that just isn't going to happen on my watch. And I said that before these meetings started, before we got together with each other. It was just, it didn't make sense to me. You don't correct an error, a perceived error, let's put it that way. You don't correct a perceived error by flexing in the wrong direction.
Another error.
Yeah. It was patently obvious to me, and so
it comes back to two wrongs don't make a right.
It absolutely does, and oftentimes two wrongs make a left.
Yes.
We have to, at some point you have to just take a stand and say, if I lose my job over something like this, then it wasn't a job I should have had in the first place.
Right.
So I do think that there are fewer errors. I think that part of it is because there are better players. But I also think that you have to pay attention to. Now, here's an interesting thing that you may not have thought of yet. With the advent of StatCast, we have almost instantaneous access to exit velocity.
Right.
Now, here's a question for you. Should a player get, quote unquote, the benefit of the doubt based on what StatCast says about the exit velocity of the baseball.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they even give the percentages of a hit.
Exactly. And I will tell you that I only make reference to that information if I have a call turned in on appeal. I don't believe, it's a fine line that we walk across. We have so much technology.
But those percentages are based on the call already being made. They are already made.
No, it's not. If you get a hard hit ball and it said you have 96% hit likelihood on that, it doesn't mean that the other 4% was an error. It means the other 4% was an out.
Oh, good point.
I don't know how they take errors or sample size into that. It's just you have a 96% likelihood that no play can be made on the ball. So this is where it gets very interesting. Do you make a scoring call based on a replay and slow motion? And the reason I ask that is
Leonard would be blown away by the technology.
Exactly. And 60 years ago, it didn't exist at all. There was no replay whatsoever. There was no television. So here's the deal. How do you reconcile using modern technology when, as I've told you before, I view my job as a scorer very simply. Very simply. I am a custodian of the integrity of the game's records. What that means to me is if it was a double in 1906, it should be a double now.
Right.
And they didn't have replay then, and they had to make decisions. So I may be an anachronism. I may be the only guy left doing it this way. I may be wrong. I don't know. But this is what I do. When I see a play in real time, I make a call in my head. If I'm not sure, I will watch the replay, not to see what happened, but to see if what happened is what I saw the first time. In other words, I try to watch it to confirm the call I've already made, not to make a call in the first place. And I think you're in the same dilemma with exit velocity. You've got to make that call and not go to the stats and say, oh, well, that had a 96% hit probability. I've got to call that a hit. If that's the case, they don't need us.
Yeah.
They've got the numbers. Robbie the robot can come over the system and say, that was a hit.
It would sound like other official scores in press boxes all over the country. You wouldn't know the difference.
Exactly. And I don't think that there's, it's a skill. It's a skill that is born of countless men, and I hope soon women, who ignored their mothers who told them that they were wasting their time and their lives watching so much baseball. And, it comes from watching not thousands, not tens of thousands, but literally hundreds of thousands of plays in order to be able to make a rapid judgment on a baseball.
Now, as a human being, you've had all this experience, but it also entails having the concentration to be in the moment and not just wander off. And as a human, with things going through your head, do you have days when you're better at your job than other days?
Oh, hell yes.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you which days the bad ones tend to be.
Which ones?
Our bad days tend to be the same bad days as one of the teams. In other words, if if you're watching a game and you've called 3 errors, you better shape up and pay attention, because the reason that games get 2, 3, 4 errors in them is that everybody is out of sync. And a game that is played poorly is a game that has no rhythm, a game that is choppy. And that tends to snowball. And so those are the
I would guess, too, if there's a pitcher that takes so damn long on the mound that you could grow old and have grandkids by the time he throws the next pitch, that has to affect how the game is going to go, how the defense is up on their toes or not. And so it could be something as simple as the catcher not being in rhythm with the pitcher, and that could throw the whole damn game off. That's my thinking.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pieces to it, but the bottom line is very simple. Whether I'm doing MLB.com, I mean, it's the same way. I get 2 errors in the first 3 innings, and I have to really, really gather myself and force myself to pay closer attention, because those are the games where I'll see a pitch, I'll write it down on my score sheet, but fail to enter it online. Something like that, where you get 5 fouls in a row and you forget to enter the 4th one.
Okay. Yes. So it is concentration, and you're to be commended for just having the kind of mind that can stick through it, because 80%...
When I succeed, I'm to be commended.
Yeah, well, you do quite often, as I'm sure they're keeping statistics on that too. Am I correct?
Well, I know that they know how many times we've been appealed and how many times we've been overturned.
Right. Okay.
I don't know what they use that data. I mean, I don't know if that data is considered predictive or not. But I mean, at some point you also have to say that there's a little bit of random luck. Some guys. I mean, we had a scorer here in the Bay Area, Jim Young, last year. Started out. He had like 5 games in Oakland in the first month, and there was not one game where he called fewer than 4 errors. We started laughing about it. I said, you're the kiss of death. You destroy defense when you walk in the building.
Michael, another terrific show. Thank you, my friend. And again, my condolences on your loss.
Thank you. I deeply appreciate that, Ralph. And, great thing about baseball is that, unlike life, we get a new chance every spring.
Yes. Unlike life, that's the definitive word on that. And how about this? Mortality sucks. I think you'll agree.
Yeah, well, we're playing to a very sophisticated audience here, so I think I can say this and get away with it. Fuck cancer.
Yes. And well said. Nothing more. We'll see you next week, Michael. Thank you.
See you next week. Thank you, Ralph.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Be well.
Bye-bye.